For a number of years, I was a member in the other house of the European Select Committee, the European Scrutiny Select Committee, under the formidable chairmanship of Lord Sir William. I expect he will be a Lord eventually, but Sir William Cash. And I say formidable because he had an absolute, hugely fervent eye for transparency, for detail, and a determination that scrutiny would be carried out with almost a zealotry attitude. But sadly, the scrutiny that we had there didn't mean we could amend or stop the weekly huge package of new EU directives and regulations that came through. Occasionally we would get a debate if another select committee or we were able to manage it. But the result was always, as we knew, once the EU had agreed to something, then it was difficult to change it. So I welcome a bill that abolishes the principle of the supremacy of EU law. And I find it a little bit depressing that many in your Lordship's House seem to have more faith in the European Union to deliver than for our own country's ability to decide its own laws. There seems to be this sort of misty-eyed view that the only institution that could really be trusted could never be our government of whatever political party, but could only be the European Union. And yet we know that so many of the rights that we got came originally from the campaigning of trade unions, who actually then got Labour and Conservative governments to bring into law some of our rights, and it wasn't just about the EU. Now, I think noble lords will understand if I say that although I'm supporting the bill, I am obviously very concerned that it does not apply to Northern Ireland because of the protocol leaving Northern Ireland still in the EU single market. And this, I think, probably more than anything else, shows the stark reality that the people of Northern Ireland, whether they like it or not, have been left under the rule of a foreign institution. And already we've seen dozens of changes to regulations which have had no discussion or democratic consent in Northern Ireland brought in. And even if the Assembly was sitting, it would make no difference. The EU makes changes which GB doesn't have to follow, but in Northern Ireland they do. And I reiterate once again, and I know noble lords will be fed up with me saying this, but we did have the same ballot paper in Northern Ireland on the referendum. And yes, there was a majority to remain, just as there was a majority to remain in Scotland. But at least Scotland is covered by this bill under the arrangements for devolved administrations. But Northern Ireland can't benefit from any of it. The protocol carefully plotted by the EU, encouraged by the Irish government, and sadly agreed to by our government, was really not about trade. It's actually about trying to ensure that there is more, that the divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is actually reduced. By retaining Northern Ireland in the same single market as the Republic, under the same customs code, VAT regime, governed by the same laws, Northern Ireland is slowly being pushed away from Great Britain, our biggest market, and forced into an economic Ireland, which of course is a foreign country. This may have been a grave mistake by our negotiators, but it certainly wasn't a mistake by the Irish government. It was an assault on Northern Ireland's constitutional position, and sadly our government naively went along with it. So I really would say to those here who are concerned about the scrutiny that this bill is going to have, and obviously in committee there will be changes and it may be that we get greater scrutiny. But I would plead to honourable members to remember that while we're talking here about scrutiny of something that ministers at least can get involved in Northern Ireland we're putting through more and more and more regulations from the European Union that nobody in this House, nobody in Northern Ireland, nobody in the Assembly, if it was sitting, has anything to do with it. And I think that is a disgrace for anyone who calls themselves pro-union.